Hey, what's going on, Who That Nation? It is yours truly, TJ Jones, the host of the State of the Saints podcast. And we have a special guest with us here on the State of the Saints podcast from NewOrleansSaints.com. We have John DeShazier. What's going on, JD?
Nothing much, man. We're riding out a little weather here in New Orleans, but other than that, everything's good.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked a little bit off air. My prayers go out to everybody, in the path of Hurricane Zeta. And make sure that y'all are careful out there, JD. No doubt about that.
Yeah, man. We're all kind of locked down. We're all preparing for it. Around here, I don't want to say you get immune to it, but you almost get a feeling where if it ain't a Cat 5, you almost feel a sigh of relief.
Right.
We're not quite out the woods yet, so hopefully everybody will. If there are any kind of losses, hopefully it's just property stuff that can be replaced.
Yeah, absolutely. Me being from New Orleans, I left back in 05 due to Hurricane Katrina. I was a freshman going to Dillon University at the time. And, I understand about the hurricane, especially also being out here in Myrtle Beach. So, if you are in the path in that area, make sure that you're listening to the authorities and make sure that you get out of the way. And like you said, JD, things can be replaced, but we gotta understand that things can be replaced, but there's only one you. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So JD, we're gonna talk a little bit about the New Orleans Saints. The Saints are 4-2, but the Who That Nation, they would say that they don't feel like a 4-2 team. There's a lot of issues that the Saints have been dealing with over the past couple weeks, especially in the secondary. JD, what's going on with the secondary? You look at some of these guys that they have, seasoned veterans. Some of the guys have been there for X amount of time, more than 2 to 3 years, and they're still having these blown coverages. What's going on with the secondary?
Well, TJ, I would tell you that I don't think it's physical. I think it's mental. I think it's and you hear them, and when I say mental, you hear them continue to say it's communication issues. Well, that's the only explanation you have for guys running as wide open as you see in the Saints secondary from time to time. You can't have that kind of, blown assignments, especially as you mentioned with veteran players. When you got, even though Malcolm Jenkins is new again to this team, but he's an NFL veteran. You got Marshawn Lattimore, who's been back there. You got Marcus Williams, who's been back there. You got Jack Rabbit Jenkins, who was back there for the last 5 games of last season. So he should be a little bit more accustomed. You got C.J. Gardner-Johnson, who was there last year. You got P.J. Williams. You got Patrick Robinson. All these guys have played in the Saints secondary last year, except for Malcolm Jenkins. So you shouldn't have the busted coverages that they have. I think Sean Payton might have said it best this week when somebody asked him if he was, real concerned or if he was, not concerned. And he said, I'm leaning a whole lot more toward real concern because, again, we're 5-6 games into the season, right, and you're still seeing busted coverages, and that shouldn't be. I mean, if you get one every 2-3 games, you say okay, you chalk it up, but we're talking probably at least a busted coverage a game, at least one, and maybe more, and that's just, look, man, that takes away from a whole lot of good work that you do that one play. They have
absolutely,
one touchdown last week, 74 yards against Carolina. Carolina had like 280 yards for the game. 74 of them came on that play. So that's the one that, kind of skews things and makes it look like it just wasn't a good game defensively.
Yeah. I mean, you look at this game, JD, this is insane. Like, you would think that, like you said, the Saints only gave up 280 total yards. You look at the first down rate, 85%. You look at over 100 yards in the first half between the running backs. You look at all of these different things. You would think that if you were like watching a game, you would think it would be a blowout, like in comparison. But I feel like as long as the defense is going to have these type of struggles, you're going to be in those games where you win one, you lose one, you win one, you lose one. And the offense can't really take a day off. I mean, if the offense struggles, then it's going to be a problem. You have these teams coming, into town. You got the Kansas City Chiefs coming up. You got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers coming up. These teams can expose you, and these teams have some good defenses. So I want to ask you about this. With the Chicago Bears, I mean, the red zone, I think they're number 1 in the NFL in defensive red zone. So there's a lot of things that the Saints have to clean up in the secondary. One thing is Marcus Williams. I think we seen Marcus Williams. He's in his fourth season in a Saints uniform. It seems like he's been dealing with these blown coverages. He's been giving up big plays, holding calls. Why don't the Saints decide to use DJ Swearinger more? Why is week after week he's a healthy scratch?
Well, when you go by what you see in practice, this is still your best option to be Marcus, and you hope, I'm guessing that the coverages that you see busted in games aren't coverages that you're seeing busted in practice. Right. If he was busting them in both places, then you say, okay, we got to do something about this. Right. But if it's just one place, then you say, okay, we can fix it in practice, because that's where you feel like you can fix it. If a guy isn't making tackles in game days and he's doing all the proper things in practice, you say, okay, well, when he gets to the game, we feel like we'll be able to get that rectified. Right. And unfortunately, Marcus being a veteran, and Malcolm being a veteran, and some of those other things, you just aren't seeing you aren't seeing it translate to the games like it should. Right. P-Rob against the Chargers turned the receiver loose. He was clearly expecting help deep. Right. When he turned him loose, he looked deep, like, okay, he's yours now. And there was nobody behind him. Yep. And he couldn't recover. And so, that's the kind of thing where, you're looking and saying, okay, we practice this stuff all the time. We talk about it all the time. We look at it on film all the time. And when the time comes in the game, we ain't ready for it. Right. Those things, if I can guarantee you this, another thing, Coach Payton always says is, you got to evaluate what you're doing. You got to evaluate who's doing it and what you're asking and who you're asking to do it. Right. So if who you're asking to do it isn't doing it the way you want them to do it, then you get somebody new to do it.
Yep. Yeah. Speaking of which, JD, you talked about getting somebody new. What is it about the New Orleans Saints? I'm seeing a little bit of a trend here. You see guys leave this team. The Saints may cut these guys, release them or what have you. And then, a couple games into the season, they bring these guys right back. And also some of the young talent that they actually have on this team. One name always comes up is the young kid, Keith Washington Jr. And I'm thinking to myself, JD, would we have known how good Marquez Callaway is in game time if it wasn't for Emmanuel Sanders and Michael Thomas being down? So why doesn't this team actually try a little bit more using some of this young talent? I mean, I hate to say it, but if Keith Washington goes out there and blows coverage, I mean, is it something that we haven't seen before? I mean, they've been blowing coverage all season. So why don't they try to utilize some of these younger players?
Yeah, but the thing about that is, and it makes sense until you look at it from this standpoint. Okay, how do you reduce the likelihood of busting the coverage? Right. And you do that with, you hope to do that with your veteran guys. So, they see Keith out there in practice. They know what he can do. So how do you reduce your risk if you're the Saints? How do you keep people in front of you and make them have, 75 yards in 12 plays, and maybe you can get them to make a penalty, or maybe you can, force a turnover, or maybe, something can happen to where you can get them to force a field goal. What's the likelihood of doing that? Is the likelihood of doing that higher with guys who are supposed to know what they're doing, or with a rookie guy that you're just not quite sure how he's going to handle the circumstances? So I guess you look at it from that standpoint. Would we have known about Marquez? I don't know, because the fact of the matter is he was behind Mike Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders, Traquan Smith, and probably Deontay Harris to a degree. Mm-hmm. So now you get him in a situation where Emmanuel Sanders is out because of COVID-19. Michael Thomas is out because of injuries. Now Traquan Smith, goes up to your quote unquote number one receiver, and Deontay probably slides in at the 3 because Deontay is still so valuable as a returner. So you don't want you can't have him out there running at the number 2 receiver and getting all those reps and burning him up. So, he can't really function the way you want him to as a returner. But Marquez Callaway, he showed exactly why they kept him. He showed exactly why he's been active. You keep him active because he can play some special teams, but he is a receiver. And so when you get deeper into the game and he learns a little bit more about what you want out of him offensively, now all of a sudden you get him out there, and it was against the Chargers. He showed the flashes as a returner. He looks like he's got some real potential as a returner. And fortunately for the Saints, they got him, because if he were to get to the street now, he would never get back in New Orleans. I
Yeah.
mean, somebody would pick him up, and he would begin as somebody's returner, and he'd probably wind up as the number 2 receiver or so before long. He looks like he's got that kind of potential.
Yeah.
So, he's the guy who took advantage of the injury situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Some guys don't rise up and take advantage of that situation the way he did, but he jumped in, and now he's in a position where, if you're the Saints, obviously he's going to be active. He won't be returning as long as Deontay Harris is back there,
right.
but he will be in that receiver rotation. He'll still be contributing on special teams, but he's shown now that he can be really valuable as a receiver.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, 8 catches, 75 yards. And just some of the routes that he was running, JD, I mean, you have to be impressed. I mean, for a guy to be that young and smart enough to be able to, look at some of those zone plays and get into the soft spots of those zones, I mean, that's pretty incredible for a young kid, that just coming into the league. And it just shows you how deep this draft was at wide receiver. I mean, we heard that all the time in the offseason, right? All of these type of wide receivers. We look at Claypool out there in Pittsburgh. We look at some of these other young wide receivers around the league, and Marquez was undrafted. So that's a testament of how good this wide receiver corps was coming into this NFL season in 2020. But staying on the secondary, there's some guys that's still out there that the Who Dat Nation like to mention. One name is Earl Thomas. Earl Thomas, of course, we know what type of talent he possessed. We know that he's an all-pro. We know all the things that he did out there in Seattle and some of the things he did in a Baltimore uniform. Looking at the New Orleans Saints and looking at the timeline of Drew Brees, I mean, I think we all can agree this may be his last year. I mean, no more than 2 years. So do you think that because of the sense of urgency, the Saints may want to take a look at a player like Earl Thomas and also a player like that played for the Saints that got recently cut by the Panthers, Eli Apple?
It wouldn't surprise me if they looked at both.
Have a little bit of technical difficulties. Okay. You can
hear
me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, Eli might be the more logical of the two because he's already been in the system. He already knows what they want. And there were some points, last year and I think the year before, where Eli actually played pretty well. I know Saints fans and most of us, you remember the low points a whole lot more than you remember the high points. That's just life. That's the way it is.
Right.
But I thought he had some moments, last year and the year before where he looked pretty good. And you wouldn't be asking him to hold down the same responsibilities as a starting corner. You can have him coming in as a nickel or a dime, and that way, you won't have him covering a number 1 receiver or a number 2 receiver probably. So, maybe he functions better in that role for the Saints. As far as Earl Thomas, hey, that one bewilders me because I look at it and say, okay, we know the talent Earl Thomas is, and we know he's had a little, some stuff off the field, but I mean, look, that ain't stopping nobody in the NFL from signing somebody, okay?
Right.
So
right.
you look and say, okay, what's going on with Earl Thomas that nobody will sign him? And so now you got to try to dig deeper into it and maybe look at the film and say, okay, is Earl Thomas what he was 3 years ago? Is Earl Thomas freelancing a little bit too much? Is Earl Thomas, playing at the same level? And does Earl Thomas's talent level match the salary demands that he probably has right now? Right. Because, now granted, Earl Thomas is on the street right now, so maybe any salary is good enough for him. But, still you gotta factor in, what you've seen on film and you wonder, okay, what's going on with Earl Thomas that, I know he was scheduled to, I think, take a visit somewhere and they canceled it.
Yeah, the Texans.
Yeah. I mean, and the Texans, Texas ain't worth bragging about to nobody.
Maybe he knew that, JD.
And the word was that players in the locker room were saying we don't want him. That bothers you. That scares you. So you got to get him in. You got to take a look at him physically, but you also got to talk to him to find out what's going on. And you hope to be able to talk to some people from Baltimore or some people. Maybe some of those guys from the Texans and say, okay, what did you guys not like about Earl Thomas? But again, he's one of those guys who's been out there for a while. So now you start to wonder, and it could be completely and totally bogus why he's out there.
Right.
But still, you wonder, and this is the paranoia that goes around with any league like the NFL. You say, okay, if nobody else wants him, why should I want him? And what am I missing that everybody else sees? So that's the thing that you got to look for.
It's like Bruce Arians said about Antonio Brown, which is since we talking about problem players. But if he does anything, we gonna cut him. It's just that simple. I think with the JD, if the Saints had a young quarterback, a young guy coming fresh out of college, then I wouldn't recommend this. But this, like I said, this is like Drew Brees' last year. Maybe he probably had like one more year after this before he decides to hang it up. And I'm questioning the sense of urgency that I'm seeing from this team, JD. You don't know how many times that you're going to see Drew Brees run out of that tunnel. So I look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and how aggressive they have been, and it seems like they're going for it. I'm just wondering, why am I not seeing that same type of energy from the New Orleans Saints? Like, throw something against the wall and see that if it sticks. I mean, you have enough veteran leadership inside of that locker room to control some of those guys. And if they can't, then just get rid of them. It's just as simple as that. But I think they need to try something in that secondary, to try to, inject some type of life inside of there. I got one more question for you about this secondary. Aaron Glenn did an interview on WWL, and one thing that he talked about a lot of these young players being attached to social media, looking at what some of the people are saying about them, being critical of some of the play. Do you think, with the lack of crowd participation in a Superdome, lack of crowd participation inside some of these stadiums around the league, do you think that is playing a huge factor? Is that a bigger deal than we're giving it credit for? Do you think they need that type of energy in order for them to perform at that level they've been performing at for the last couple of years?
Well, I think there's something to that. I do believe that, fan participation, it can be underrated. It can give players a lot of juice. We've seen the momentum that happens when, you make a big play, the fans go crazy, and all of a sudden the defense or the offense is real juiced. And if you're able to get a turnover or a touchdown, now suddenly it's a whole lot different. I mean, you can just feel the vibe and the emotions. Now, that said, these dudes get paid to do this. So you better bring your own juice, because that's the way it is, because the dude on the other side playing against you, he get paid too. And he want to earn his money. He want to provide for his family. And he want to be able to buy the things that he wants to buy. Yeah. So he's going to bring his own juice. So you better get used to it from that standpoint. Yeah. And if I can double back on AB and Tampa and Gronk on Tampa, those dudes, fortunately for them, had the best and biggest advocate on earth. They had Tom Brady saying, bring him in. And somebody's gonna have to advocate for Earl Thomas. Now, I don't know who knows him well. I don't know if he's made those kinds of friends. I know, again, that Ravens thing, the way he ended up leaving the Ravens really, really kind of set wrong, because he got into an argument with a teammate over something that happened on the field, and I think it was during training camp, and had to come back and admit he was wrong, and then he posted on social media and was like, okay, this is what the deal was. Yeah. He broke about 15 rules, it seems. and that's the kind of thing, again, a team that's looking to bring him in says, okay, is that who Earl Thomas is? Right. Or is he the guy from Seattle? Or maybe he was the guy in Seattle that he's the guy now, but Seattle was so good that they could tolerate it. So again, you just got to look at what the chemistry issue is. But I can guarantee you this. I promise you this. If there's a rock to kick over to check a dude out, the Saints going to kick that rock over and see what it's about. Yeah. They might not do it. They might not do it, out loud. Like some teams will say, "Yo, we're going to bring a dude in," or, we're looking at a dude. But they do their due diligence, and that's how they end up. I think a couple of years ago they brought in, first Dez Bryant and then Brandon Marshall. Yeah. So they're gonna kick over rocks and see who's out there and see who's able to help.
Yeah, I just look at somebody like Earl Thomas. I mean, like I said, in a normal season, if you didn't have a 41-year-old quarterback at the twilight of his career, then I would be like, no. But I just think that the Saints need to get a little bit more aggressive in that regard. Speaking of which, issues in the locker room. Let's talk about Michael Thomas for a second. I mean, for the last couple of weeks, he finds himself in the news, talking about the fight that he had with C.J. Gardner-Johnson at practice. There was some trade rumors going on. Sean Payton was messing with the media, for the last couple of weeks, putting hilarious memes about it, talking about how, there's no validity behind this. But what, Michael Thomas, do you think at any particular time, I can't believe I'm asking this question to you, but do you think at any time the Saints thought about possibly trading Michael Thomas?
I don't think so. I would say 99.99999% no, but I also have to say that anything's possible. I mean, this the pro sports, man. If somebody's looking at Michael Thomas and somebody offers you something that's crazy, you at least got to listen. Right. You can't just say, no. You at least got to consider it and say, well, hey, no, we ain't gonna do it. But man, that's a mighty nice package. So I don't think the Saints were actively or have been actively shopping him. You don't sign a dude to the contract you sign him to, and then say, okay, we want to get rid of him. Now, that said, the not suspension, I guess fine and deactivation from the Rams game. That's one of those things that stands out and says, okay, here's the situation that they felt like they needed to handle. And the fact of the matter is, TJ, let's be honest here. It could have been handled quietly in-house and nobody never would have known.
Right.
But it was one of those things where when you announce we're deactivating them and it's a disciplinary issue, then now that's somewhat of a message. That's right. Okay, you did something. It wasn't cool. We're going to put it out there just to let you know that it wasn't cool. But it could have been something that didn't have to get out. So, there had to be some dissatisfaction there. And hopefully, this thing ain't going to go sideways and they'll get back in harmony. I think it will because, look, I don't know how many NFL teams are structured to where Michael Thomas would be a dude who would catch 149 passes. But the Saints are one. But the Saints, we know the Saints are one. And I don't care who's back there taking snaps. He's good for 120, 130 probably because of the way this offense is and because of the way he gets open. Yeah. So, that's one of those things where you hope and pray that, both sides, whatever it is. And I think it's gone past because you hadn't heard anything else. And look, this is the NFL. In a locker room, not everybody's going to be, they ain't going to be hugged up and singing Kumbaya.
Yeah,
everybody ain't going to like everybody all the time.
Right.
That's just a fact. But what they do like and respect is you doing your job.
Right.
And few people in the NFL do their job as well as he does his job. Yep. So that's one of those things where unless he's just out doing something that's, jail worthy, then they're probably going to be okay with it because, he's a dude who produces every day, every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, whenever they play in the game. He produces when he's healthy. So that's one of those things where, you live with some eccentric behavior, I guess, if he's got that.
Yeah, they always say, if your production, outweighs the problem or the headache, then most likely the team is going to keep you. I think about I think about this, JD. I think about back in the day with the New York Giants, and they talk about Lawrence Taylor, and they said Lawrence Taylor would be in a film room in the back, sleep because he was out all night, and Bill Belichick would even try to wake him up at all. He went to Bill Parcells and asked him. He was like, "Well, Lawrence Taylor was sleeping in a film study." He said, "Did you wake him up?" He's like, "No." He said, "Good." Like because on Sunday, Lawrence Taylor was gonna ball out. I mean, this is a guy that's an MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, an unstoppable force. So, like you said, if the production outweighs the headache, the team is going to choose that production over that headache 9 times out of 10. And we all know that Michael Thomas does his job pretty well.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Speaking of doing your job, I when you look at the Saints in October, I mean, to say they doing their job in October is an understatement. 15 consecutive games they won in October. I think dating back to like 2010 or something like that. 17 consecutive home games won in the month of October. What makes this team so special in the month of October? And what does that say about the coaching staff of the New Orleans Saints over the past decade?
Well, I think the biggest thing is October is like the second quarter of the season. So you get those first 4 games out of the way. And by then, I think you find a good rhythm and a good identity of who you are and what you do well. Right. And the Saints, and they start grooving with it. When you've had, over all these years, you've had, whether it's, Drew Brees or Michael Thomas or Jimmy Graham, or whether it's John Vilma or Cam Jordan or DeMario Davis, guys find that rhythm in October because it's the second quarter of the season. And like I said, not that the first 4 games don't count, but right. You really get into, okay, this is what we really do well. This is what we really do well on offense and defense and special teams. And I think they just figure out how to groove. And another thing with the Saints, especially this season, is, and it sounds simple until you actually try to apply it, but you do what's necessary to win the game that day.
Right.
And I don't know what that might be. Maybe that's running it 42 times like they did against Detroit.
Right.
Or maybe that's throwing it 40 times like they almost did against Carolina. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's giving up 350 yards, but getting a stop right at the end against the Chargers, or whatever it takes to win that day. You come out of it battered and bruised, but you get that W and you keep it moving because
right.
At the end of the day, what folks are going to remember, especially if you win it all, is that you won it all. They ain't going to go back and say, man, in week 3, boy, Justin Herbert really tore the Saints up. They ain't going to be worried about that. They ain't going to be worried about what happened in the Super Bowl. And so,
right.
That's what you got to figure out how to win that day. And they've been able to do that this season so far. Now, it's going to get harder, man, because you're talking about the Bears, you're talking about, Tampa Bay, and you're talking about, San Francisco, and you're talking about, Kansas City. You're talking about playing at Carolina. You're talking about playing the Falcons twice. And I don't care how bad the Falcons are. They're going to play the Saints hard.
Yep.
They're going to play them hard. Yep. So you're talking about all those obstacles that are going to be in the way. So it won't get easier. So, what they discovered in October, they got to see if they can replicate that thing in November and December, because now all of a sudden you got a real challenger for the division championship in Tampa Bay. They beat Tampa Bay here, and you felt like, okay, well, maybe, all that hype over Brady and all the rest of those dudes, it might be a little premature. Right. Tampa Bay has found a groove.
Yep.
They have found a groove, and the Saints gonna have to match that groove. And now they add Antonio Brown. If you add Antonio Brown and Chris Godwin and Mike Evans and Gronk, now you put those 4 dudes on the field together. And if you're the Saints, you're gonna have to pick some poison out. You got to get to Brady quick, because if you're talking about matching up against those 4 dudes, somebody gonna get loose if you don't get there quick. That's just the nature of the beast. Somebody's gonna get loose, and that ain't a team that you can be busting coverages against the way Brady's rolling right now. So they've been really good in October. They figure out a groove, and they're gonna have to extend that thing, because man, it ain't gonna get easier here at all.
Yeah. One person that was linked to the Saints, or maybe it was just an article that can kind of help them get to Tom Brady, with J.J. Watt. Do you think the Saints need to think about getting the seasoned veteran? I mean, he's out there in Houston, and even the biggest Houston Texans fan probably want J.J. Watt to lead their team so he could possibly get a chance at a championship. So would you look at a guy like J.J. Watt? He still has a little bit left in the tank. He may not be the same player he was a couple years ago, but do you think that he would help the Saints with their pass rush issues?
When I look at J.J. Watt, I don't know if it's because the NBA call it. I don't know if they call it. Hell yeah, J.J. Watt, because J.J. Watt still, you're talking about J.J. Watt on a defense that doesn't have a lot of stuff around him, and so now, opposing teams can concentrate on him and chip him and double him, and they can make his production go down. Right. The Saints looked at Jadeveon Clowney because they're saying, you know what, if we can stack as many good players as possible, we're going to do it, especially on the defensive line, because you can't have too many pass rushes. You just can't. The game is too hard now with receivers able to run free, and DBs can't really put no hands on them. And so if you can't get to the quarterback, you can't stop a team. Well, if you add a Jadeveon Clowney, if you add a J.J. Watt, and you've got a healthy Marcus Davenport, and you got a Cam Jordan, and you got Trey Hendrickson playing the way he's playing, and you
Mhm.
got Sheldon Rankins, you got David Onyemata, and you got Malcolm Brown. Now all of a sudden you got a defensive line that I believe any team in the league would envy. And
Yeah.
so now it's just a matter of rotating them in and out and say, go get them, go sick them,
Right.
go get them. So
Right.
if that possibility is there, I'm sure the Saints are investigating it, because that's one of those things that could be a kind of a game changer. I mean, we're
Yep.
talking about a dude who was 2-time NFL Defensive Player of the Year, and I mean,
Yep.
in them years, he was as dominant a defensive lineman as in that window as I have ever seen.
Yeah.
That dude was all pro at defensive end and defensive tackle in the same year.
Yep.
So I mean, he can do it, and now he's just on a team where he doesn't have the players around him to help him do it, to maybe
Right.
keep some of the pressure off of it.
Yeah. I mean, we all remember that soundbite, when the Saints played the Houston Texans, and him saying, I don't want to hit Drew. I like Drew.
Yeah.
I mean, he was that dominant in that game. I mean, this guy was a nightmare. So I definitely, if you ask somebody like JJ, it would be great for the New Orleans Saints pass rush. And the final question I want to ask you is about the Chicago Bears. The Saints got a big matchup going up against the Chicago Bears at Soldier Field. It's going to be pretty cold out there. It's going to be, I think, in below 40 degrees. We know the old myth about dome teams can't play in the cold or whatever. But the Chicago Bears, they're coming off of a pretty embarrassing loss. We know Nick Foles was really critical of Matt Nagy, the head coach, about some of the play calling and decision making. Allen Robinson is in concussion protocol. But do you think the Saints could possibly go out here and go up against a team that has a really good defense and some linebackers that fly around the field? And like I said, really good at red zone defense. Do you think the Saints have what it takes to go out to Soldier Field and knock off those Bears?
Well, when you say really good, you should say that in all caps. That's a really good, that's a really good D. Now can they do it? Yeah, because what the Saints can do is they can chip away at that defense, and that's what you might have to do, because Khalil Mack up front and Akeem Hicks up front, and Akeem Hicks obviously wants to kick tail against his former team.
Right.
And you've got you got a front seven that's really good, and you got some dudes in that secondary that are really good. So, you might have to chip away at them. They might not give you any big ones, and we've seen how they can get after the quarterback. But what you can do against them too is you can keep the ball away from them, because you can make them one-dimensional. They don't run the ball well, and we know the Saints have one of the best run defenses in the league. And you can put the ball in Nick Foles' hands. And the Saints have gotten Nick Foles twice. They beat him in the playoffs, in the playoffs with the Bears, when they won their first. In the playoffs with Philly.
Yeah.
When they won their first road playoff game, and they beat them in the playoffs with Philly, with
divisional round, 2018.
In divisional round, So they've been able to get him a couple of times, and hopefully, I don't want to see Allen Robinson be out because of concussion protocol. You never want to see that from a player, but if he ain't playing, that obviously works in the Saints' favor, because he's their number 1, 2, and 3 receiver probably. Outside of the kid, although the kid from Tulane looks like he got some tools. He looks like he can play Mooney. But if you can get Allen Robinson out of there, all of a sudden it makes them different. Can the Saints win it? Because the Saints are probably going to go in, unless it's windy, they're going to go in with their game plan. They're going to throw it, and they're going to run it like they always do. The wind is what will affect them more than anything. And a little bit of cold ain't going to bother them, but the wind will affect them. But that's where, if the Saints go in without Emmanuel Sanders, and that's a huge possibility. We don't know Michael Thomas's status. So again, Tre'Quan Smith and Jared Cook and Alvin Kamara are going to have to carry the mail for this team. You hope Marquez Callaway and Deontay Harris and Austin Carr, those guys are going to have to make some plays, because you were talking about a defense that they don't take a whole lot from anybody. I mean, that's a stiff defense, man. And so a lot of times they can win a 17-14 game because they can keep you to 14. They're that good. If you can get the plus 20 on, you got a real chance, because their offense has trouble scoring. But when it comes to stopping people, I mean, even though they lost to the Rams, they were doing their job. They just couldn't get any help at all from that offense. They didn't get anything from that offense. So if you're the Saints, you got to hope that you can hold that offense down the same way that the Rams did, because it looks like that offense right now looks like it might be able to be had. But you got to get out there in the field and do it. And if you're the Bears, you're looking at the Saints defense saying, okay, everybody else get a deep one on them. We ought to be able to get a deep one too. I mean, that's life in the NFL.
That's
when
true.
teams see what your weakness is, everybody is going to attack your weakness. So until the Saints show that they can stop that, everybody is going to attack that.
Yep. I mean, why wouldn't you? You know, I mean, that's the keys to victory, right? I mean, the film study that the coaches see week to week. I mean, they just try to exploit some of your limitations. And right now, I mean, the secondary is the liability of the New Orleans Saints. I mean, you know, two things are going to happen. It's going to be a big play, or it's going to be pass interference or a holding call. So teams are going to try to do their best to try to exploit that particular matchup and try to make it work in their favor. But JD, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being a part of the State of the Saints podcast. We look forward to your commentary throughout the rest of the season. And I know you're headed out there to Chicago, so be careful, and safe travels to you.
I appreciate it, TJ. We're gonna bundle up and hopefully we'll be talking soon again. Hopefully after a couple of more Saints wins.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. Once again, this is the State of the Saints podcast. Mr. John DeShazier. Thank you so much, sir.
You're welcome. I appreciate it.